And all right, so good morning, everyone. My name is Jesse, and I am with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. For those joining us for the first time, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. And we're really excited today. We've got 3 groups joining us from across North America. 3 more should be joining very soon, so we're going to hope they arrive before we get underway. But first, we've got Miss Wafer, who's the Laurel Springs School teacher for students all over the world. Hello, Miss Wafer. We've got Miss Hawkinjoss's grade 6 and 8 in Sayreville, New Jersey. Hi, guys. Hello. And we've got Miss Hawksoma joining us for the very first time with her group grade 4s in Madison, Wisconsin. Hi, guys. Hey, we just had another class join us. Hi there, Miss Burkett. How you doing? Hi, guys. Hi. We'll find out what class you guys are in just a minute, but you're not on my list, but it's exciting that you're here. I love it. All right. Without further ado, the reason you guys are all joining us is for our speaker. So we are doing live in Newfoundland in the east coast of Canada by Justine Ammendolia. She is a marine biologist, plastic pollution fighter, and science communicator. Her work has taken her to Eastern Greenland, Western Greenland, all over Arctic Canada, to Norway and more in pursuit of understanding how plastic pollution affects the wildlife in the oceans around our world. We've got our 5th class just joining us, Miss Rindless Backers group. So everyone's here now. Excellent. So welcome in, guys. I'm going to turn it over to Justine. Thank you so much for joining us, and take it away.
Hey everyone, so I'm going to transfer over to my PowerPoint. So basically my name is Justine Ammendolia, and like Jesse said, I'm a marine biologist and plastic pollution researcher. And essentially that means as a marine biologist, I work with animals that live in and around the ocean, like seabirds and fish. And I also got really interested within the past couple years with regards to plastic pollution. So you can see me here in a garbage dump, and I never expected that my passion and love for animals would actually bring me to studying garbage in the ocean. But as most of you probably have heard, this is a really big issue that's facing not only our oceans, but our rivers and lakes and really environment as a whole. So the way I'm going to talk about this presentation is I want to introduce you to myself, where I grew up, how I got interested in marine biology, and some of the exciting adventures that I've had in my science career that have kind of led me to where I'm at today. So starting off, for those of you, I think we have a class from Kitchener. So you know where Toronto is. I grew up in Canada's largest city with about 6 million people. And you know, someone who studies marine biology isn't typically from a really urban area that's surrounded by freshwater lakes. And for me, I got really interested in oceans and marine biology from my family vacations down to Florida every year. And this is really my first introduction to the oceans. And at the age of 6, I hopped in the water and I never wanted to come out. I literally got my hands on a pair of goggles, and I was completely fascinated with sticking my head underwater and looking at all the different fish I could find. And even at a very young age, you know, I was asking questions about how fish interacted with other fish, or how they responded to like environment changes and things like that. And you know, I always had that spark for marine biology. So I kind of held on to that. And then that led me to go to college or university. And it gave me an opportunity to visit other places of the world that really kept that interest in marine biology up. So I was actually able to literally get my feet wet and go down to the tropics for 3 weeks, where I went to Belize, a tropical country where I was studying corals for a few weeks. And for me, this was completely eye-opening because I was surrounded. You can see how small I am in this picture. And, you know, I felt really tiny compared to thousands of animals that were surrounding me as soon as I took the plunge. And, you know, this experience left me really humble as a human, because I'm like, there's so many animals on this planet to study and explore and kind of get to know. But I knew at the end of this trip that the tropics weren't really my cup of tea. I wanted to hit an area that was a bit colder, that felt closer to home, because I'm from Canada. And you know, in university, we have teachers that are called professors, kind of like how you guys have your classroom teacher. So I met this really inspiring teacher named Dr. Shoshana Jacobs. And after going to one of her talks about her amazing research up in Arctic Canada studying seabirds, it really left me inspired. And after seeing how she was up in different parts of the world that were particularly very cold, where you need a few jackets, I really wanted to pursue that kind of research and that kind of science. And I asked her after her lecture if she would ship me off to the Arctic. And I thought she would have told me no, but she actually said yes. So what we ended up planning out was a trip all the way to this country called Greenland, that's above the Arctic Circle. And the plan was for me to join a team with 3 other researchers in a very, very remote part named Cap Hogue, where no people actually lived, and it was home during the summer to a few million seabirds that you can see in the corner there. So these birds, unlike the ones that live in our backyards all over the world, they actually love being near oceans, and they love being in the cold, so that's why they're up in the Arctic. So basically, I was thrown into this whole world of project planning and going on a scientific research trip. And it started off with booking my own helicopter. And you can see me sticking out right there. And it's kind of like how your parents might call an Uber or a taxi to get somewhere. In the Arctic, during the summer, you mostly have to call helicopters because there's no roads and it's really hard to get around. So that's how I ended up getting to the field site to meet with the 3 other researchers. Now, the place we went to was basically a cliff, okay? And you can see on the very top is where the birds lived. That was their home for the summer. And all the way on the bottom, that's where we were living. And you can see it's a tiny little cabin, right? So our mornings would start off at 5 a.m., which is way before school starts, and we would climb all the way up the cliff to visit the birds every day and basically do our science and get to know them and research them. Now, our home was a one-room cabin that was usually used for hunting, but we shared it with, there were 4 of us all together sharing this tiny, tiny cabin. And unlike our houses where you can flick on the electricity and get some lights, there was no lights here. It was completely without electricity and running water. We couldn't use our cell phones or internet. It was very off-grid. And with regards to darkness, because people always say, well, what happens when it got dark? Because we're in the high Arctic, there's 24-hour sunlight. So the sun never stops up there. And the dog you see in the picture is actually a camp dog who would protect us from polar bears up there because there are polar bears in the Arctic. Now, we were eating food from cans a lot because it's really hard to get fresh produce up there and vegetables and fruits. And you see the ice in the bottom. We were actually shoveling that into buckets and melting it down for drinking water because we were surrounded by the ocean and we can't drink seawater. Now, my favorite part of the trip was actually the washroom facilities because you can see the toilet right in the beginning of the picture. It had the most beautiful view in the whole field camp. We were overlooking mountains. So as you do your business, you're basically looking at mountains and you're also watching out to see if there's polar bears around you. So that was definitely an experience. So my project as a marine biologist was to go study these birds' little auks, to join this research team and have my own project. And what my question was I wanted to know where the birds were getting their food. And you do that as a biologist by taking little backpacks, little electronic trackers. You put them on the animals and you let them fly off in the ocean, and those little trackers tell you where the animals are going. But the thing is that you have to take off the trackers when the animals come back so that you can get all this information and reuse them again. But everything was going great with my project up until the point where the birds didn't come back with the trackers. So they basically lost them in the ocean, and I started freaking out because I had no idea what to do. But then I had a bit of a light bulb moment, and I figured that I could just simply collect bird poop, and that's what I did. So you see all the samples there. That came from me capturing the birds and holding them on a notebook and waiting for them to give me samples. But regardless of the poop, this experience changed my life because this was my office for 6 weeks and it was completely inspiring. I learned from this experience that humans are even smaller than what I thought we were, and that the environment is so beautiful and worth protecting and conserving these animals. And for me, it really took me by shock that at the end of this trip, hold on one second. At the end of this trip, that there was actually plastics in the ocean, and the birds had been eating the plastics that summer. And for me, it was really devastating. So what I ended up doing was kind of switching gears, and I got really interested in studying marine plastics. You can see this picture. It shows a plastic bag that basically looks like a big chunk of ice, like an iceberg. And for me, it was this is essentially, how plastics enter aquatic systems and oceans and lakes and rivers, is they come in usually big forms and then they break up over time into tiny little pieces of plastic that are called microplastics. And you can see here, they almost look like candies, right? They're super small and they're smaller than the size of a grain of rice. And the thing is that over time, these plastics, when they're in the water, other chemicals can kind of stick onto them like a sponge, right? And then when an animal eats these plastics, it harms them. So it's not good for them. And the thing is that we're just starting to understand what extent microplastics in animals can actually cause harm. So basically, after learning about plastics, I decided that I wanted to become a garbage detective when I grew up. And that's what I'm doing right now with my job. I live in a place called Newfoundland, Canada. It's a province, basically the size of California, so really big. And we're an island in the middle of the Atlantic. We're the furthest eastern point in continental North America you can get. And what's great about it is that, you know, we're able to visit all these different beaches and look at the different types of plastics that are washing up from other places. And we can get a really good sense about what the garbage scene is like in the ocean. Now, our field sites are absolutely gorgeous during the summer. You can see the water looks crystal blue, almost like a Caribbean beach. And, you know, my team that I work with, the Placentia Ocean Marine Debris Survey, it's great because I work with two other people, Jess Melvin and Madeline Burry, and we go out to these beaches and we basically look for all these different types of garbage during really nice weather and also during really, really bad weather during the winter. You can see the waves are big, it's icy, it's snowy, it's cold. But it's really important to basically take note of what kind of plastic and garbage is ending up on the beaches. So this is us doing surveys during nice weather. And you can see us bending down, seeing close what kind of plastic is there. And what we're trying to answer are questions like, what's the most common type of plastic in the ocean? Where's it coming from? Is it from local or from faraway places because the ocean carries it? And, you know, as scientists, we can't always answer every question. People sometimes think that we have all the answers, but we really don't. And you can see that there's some houses, you know, we're researching in someone's backyard. So what we tend to do is we get those people who live there engaged with the research and we go on beach cleanups. And what's fantastic about this is that a lot of the locals who know about the different types of garbage in the area are actually able to share that knowledge with us. And we're able to go back and forth, which is wonderful because it means that you don't have to be a full scientist to do this kind of work. So now some fun types of garbage, if you can see this, it looks real, it's barely recognizable, right? It's a piece of plastic that's burnt. It's a laundry detergent bottle. You might find it in your parents' laundry room at home. And you can see it's all burnt up. And that's because in areas with small populations, there's typically not a lot of garbage trucks that come by and do waste disposal and recycling and stuff. So sometimes people have to burn their garbage because there's really no choice, and we find pieces like that. Another cool piece of garbage that we tend to find are these little plastic plants. You know, every time we find them in the field, I'm always the one who's laughing because I can barely recognize them within the first look because they look so natural and so similar to the what to extent of plastic. We tend to mostly find fishing gear. I know.
Just your audio is cutting out.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yep, you're good.
Perfect. So you can see here, this is a fishing buoy. For the folks who are not close to oceans, you might not recognize it, but fishers use this to attach to their nets and their traps so that they can keep track of, you know, where they're catching their crabs or their lobsters or fish. But, you know, we don't really find too many buoys. What we do find are these plastic ropes. And you can see here, it's all puffed up and there's lots of pieces coming out of it. And those are called threads. And what we find is thousands of these all over the beach. And one cool part of our research is being able to make the connection between small little pieces like these plastic threads to bigger chunks of rope and things like that. So it really is being a garbage detective at the end of the day. Now, when we do our science, we also try to do something called citizen science, which means that this science is accessible to people who don't go to university and spend years studying science. You know, it's everyday folks who are just interested in contributing to knowledge. And what we do when we record what kinds of garbage we find on the beach, we take a mobile app called Marine Debris Tracker, and we put all the numbers into it. And what this does is it puts it in a massive, massive, massive spreadsheet that everyone in the world can see and everyone can share. So anyone can use this technology, even you guys, walking to school and you see garbage on the sidewalk, you can put it and everyone in the world can see what kind of garbage you're finding. Because at the end of the day, we can't really help reduce plastic pollution unless we know which is the worst kind of plastic out there in the environment. So we also test plastics in the water to see what kind of plastic is floating around. And this little contraption in the corner is called a surface trawl. And it's almost like a butterfly net. You kind of swoop it across the water as your boat drives, and you catch plastics that are hanging around there. And what's great about is the design itself. You can build it yourself at home with materials from local hardware stores, which is way better than buying a really, really expensive piece of science gear. So this is what our team chooses to use as tools that, that are accessible to people who, maybe might not have a lot of money. So when we also go out on the boats, we work a lot with fish harvesters, the folks who do the fishing. And usually they have a lot of advice for us because at the end of the day, they know their waters far better than we do. So we choose to listen to them and modify our methods according to their thoughts. Now, I've also worked on oh, sorry about that. My apologies. Oh, one sec. Technical difficulty.
That's half the fun.
Oh, sorry about that, Skip. So anyways, sorry about that. So another project I've kind of volunteered on is working with my partner who is studying the presence of plastic in Atlantic cod, a type of fish in Newfoundland. And what's really cool is that we were on a boat a few times working with local fishers, and as they were catching their fish to sell at the market, they usually take the fish and take out the guts and throw the guts overboard. But what we did was we collected them so that Jackie Saturno, who's in the picture there, could analyze it for plastics. And it's really cool because, it's a stinky job. You have to take out fish guts, and, we're girls that play with guts, so it's all good. And we dig through them and try to find the plastics that are present there. So basically studying plastic means looking at multiple levels of the environment as well as the animals to kind of get a sense of what's out there. Now, just to end it off, I've researched a few different ways how to study plastics, and it's always humbling in how little I know. We always think scientists have all the answers, but it's been a great adventure so far, and I really look forward to kind of pushing this a bit more. And for your classes, I really recommend that you guys take local action in your areas, because you can reduce the amount of plastics you use at home, in your classrooms, or even in your schools. And anyone can really get involved in this exciting task of reducing the amount of plastic pollution out there. So thank you so much for listening, and I'm excited for your questions.
Outstanding. Thank you so much, Justine. All right, guys. So let's head straight to questions. We'll start with Ms. Hockenjoss's class. You guys have one to kick us off? Go right ahead.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Rory, and what is the biggest challenge in conducting research in the Arctic?
Sorry about that. Jesse, could you repeat?
Yeah, actually, could you? Yeah, I didn't quite catch it either. Sorry.
Oh, sorry about that, Robin.
Hi, my name is Rory, and what is the biggest challenge in conducting research in the Arctic?
Okay. Thank you.
Oh, for sure. So the thing is working in the Arctic, it's very difficult logistically to get up there because it's very expensive in terms of flights and all that. And I've been quite lucky where I've worked with research groups who already have ties and relationships up there. But another really important part that I didn't mention because I only have so much time is when you do work in the Arctic, you want to respect the people who live up there, because there's actually a lot of people up there and they call it home and they live off the land and whatnot. So when you go up to the Arctic, you have to respect that's people's backyard. And to have those relationships before you go and do research is really, really important. So I would say that's probably the toughest part, because you want to make sure everything's respectful for everyone.
Excellent. I want to note before we go to our second question, we've got quite a fey groups watching on YouTube Live. If you guys want to type questions in there, I can pass them along. Just please do that. All right, Miss Hoxema's class, if you guys have a question, come on up. Yeah, whenever you're ready, guys. Your audio might be a little off, so we'll check. Hope for the best.
Hi, I'm Eton, and I'm asking what her favorite part of her job is.
Could you repeat? Yeah, sorry, guys. Audio is a little off.
What her favorite part of her job is.
Favorite part of your job is, Justine?
Oh, favorite part of the job. I have to say it's being able to go to some really beautiful places. It's really tricky with an office job to get out of your office and to, you know, tell your boss, sorry, I'm going for a walk on the beach. But with my job, we get to go out to the beach every month, which is fantastic. So being outside, seeing some really beautiful and cool places, and of course, seeing the animals there. I got into marine biology because I love animals and I love ecosystems. So being able to see polar bears and seals and these really beautiful animals has been a highlight of my job so far. So great question, thank you.
Very cool. Quick follow-up on polar bears. You mentioned the bathroom site. Did you ever have any polar bears come near?
So, when we were sitting on the toilet doing our business watching for polar bears, I'm happy to report we saw nothing because that would have been very stressful. It's not fun. Yeah.
All right. We had Miss Rindlisbacher's class join us. So if you guys have a question, come on up.
Okay.
You're good. Oh yeah, you're sitting. Nope, I had you demuted. There we go.
Oh.
You're all set. Nope, you muted yourself again. I'll do it. Don't worry. There we go. You're set.
Hello, my name is Maggie and I have this question. What kinds of chemicals got stuck on the plastics?
What types of chemicals got stuck on the plastics?
Oh, for sure. That's a really, really good question, actually. There's a lot of different chemicals that can get attached to plastic. You know, when sometimes people garden and they put things like pesticides, so chemicals that keep bugs away, that's been known to stick onto plastics. Things like different chemicals from boats, oils, a whole bunch. I mean, if you want a list, I can definitely send them to you. They're just not too fun to read though. So yeah, lots of different chemicals that we use in our homes, our gardens, and industry really.
Yeah, excellent. Well, not excellent, bad, but good. Yeah. All right. So I'm pretty sure it's Miss Mills's class that joined us. So if you guys have a question, you've been waiting so patiently there, go right ahead, guys. Let's see. Oh, you're muted for some reason. We are having a lot of audio difficulties today. It's kind of keeping us on our toes. Yes, you're demuted. It's just we don't. Try again. Let's see. Fingers crossed. No, sorry guys. Okay, so try and work on that. I don't know what might happen. I know you guys were having technical stuff earlier. Worst case, top left of your screen, a little blue square with lines in it. You can type in questions there. So try and do that, and then we'll come back and see if you guys can speak to us in a little bit. In the meantime, Ms. Wafer, do you have any questions from any of your students?
I do, and just so you know, if you see me going from screen to screen, my classroom is a group of students on my second screen here. That's where they're asking questions. They're also sending them via text. So I'm a little distracted, but I do have some questions. And I wanted to share too, we are hosting Plastics in the Past week, March 31st through April 6th, where our whole community is going to try to cut back on plastic as much as possible. So we're really excited about that. And that's probably where this question from Adam came. He is in 5th grade in Fresno, California, and he's asking about the microfibers, the plastic microfibers in clothing, and if that is an issue, and if we try to use, you know, what could we do to combat that if that is an issue?
For sure. Yeah. So that's a great point. Thank you so much for that. Now, the thing is that when you look at your clothes, you know, when you guys like eat food and there's labels on your food telling you what's in it? With clothes, we actually have the same kind of labels that say what kind of materials make it up. And basically, we use a lot of plastic in our clothing. So a lot of the clothes we wear are plastic. And as you can imagine, when you put it in a washing machine, plastic, like tiny little plastics, like the ones I showed you, even smaller, come off of those because they're being washed, and that water can get put into rivers, lakes, and the ocean. So plastics and clothes are a huge issue. Microfibers, the tiny little threads that come off, are actually, they make up a huge number of the amount of plastic in the ocean. So one thing that you can do to combat that is to actually buy, there's a product that just came out, Cora balls, I believe, like little balls that you can stick in your washing machine, and it'll tumble with the clothes, and it'll actually collect plastics. So then you can dispose of it through the garbage instead of having those little fibers go out into the waterways. But I mean, there's a lot of upcoming research right now with people trying to make materials that are much more friendly than, you know, synthetic plastics. So there's more coming out on that.
Excellent. So the girl in Ms. Mill's class, and I'm sorry we couldn't get the audio working, so Katie wanted to ask, what is the most common type of plastic you find? Does it, and so that's the general question, and then is it different places? Is there anything you can share on that?
That's a great question, Katie. Thank you so much for asking that. So we visit 6 different beaches, and each beach has a different plastic personality, right? Different types of plastic wash up and things like that. So with what we're mostly finding tends to be fishing gear related. So the ropes and those little threads I showed you, they're quite common in a few beaches, but then there's other beaches that actually have a lot of clothing that wash up and a lot of metals, right? I know that metal, like aluminum cans and all that aren't plastic, but we also watch out for things like that too. So we're finding a huge different number of like hot topic kind of materials that wash up, but I would say it's mostly fishing gear related. And that's just because with the fishing industry, a lot of local fishers don't really have a choice in what materials they can use. Plastic is really the only thing on the market, and it's not their fault. It's really just how the industry is going and who's making all this material.
Yeah. Just a quick follow-up on the fishing gear. One of the things that a lot of other plastic researchers have shared with us is this idea of ghost nets, catching things. Can you talk a little bit about that for students that might not know?
For sure. So the big, you know that big rope I showed you guys with the buoy? That is a very small fraction of what that rope used to be a part of. Those ropes can be massively long and all that. And when sometimes in Newfoundland, because I showed you how harsh the winters are, ropes can get lost at sea in nets. And it's not because the fishers throw them out, it's just because the weather takes them away and they're stuck in the ocean. And what happens with these nets is they float at sea and then they can trap animals in them. And there's been a lot of cases where whales, seals, birds, fish, a lot of different types of animals get caught in these nets and they end up dying because they can't get out. And the problem is that plastic is such a good material. It's very hard to break it down that, you know, it can cause a lot of harm to the environment. So not only the small little plastics I showed you and the chemicals that go onto them, but also plastics in their big, massive state can be an issue for the environment.
Yeah. All right, we did have a group online ask us a question. So Mr. Coate from Robert Thirsk High School in Calgary, what are the largest changes that you're seeing in Arctic and Atlantic waters, and are you seeing effect on the wildlife in those areas?
Ooh, that's a great question. To be honest with you, I'm not really studying the wildlife right now at the moment. I'm more focused on the beach personality and the plastics. But with regards to the weather out here, it has been relatively sporadic within the past 5 years I've been here, which is nothing compared to how many years most Newfoundlanders have lived here. And what we're finding is like there's a lot of storms and a lot of like very extreme weather events. And this all comes back to climate change. I'm sure for most of the classrooms here, you all are experiencing different types of extreme weather events, let it be heat waves or big thunderstorms, things like that. And we're finding, yeah, just a lot of storms and very weird winters. We're not finding the winters are as cold as much as they used to be. At least that's what I've heard from other folks.
Yeah, there we go. Demuted again. So I just want to note too, so Mr. Coate, if you want to pass on more questions, that was great. And it's really interesting how almost all of our conversations with researchers and explorers around the world ultimately end up touching on climate change. This is something that has been universally recognized, universally noted around the world, regardless of the discipline that people are in. So I'm glad we ended up touching on that point. All right, let's go through a second round of questions, and let's hope that the audio works a little better with some of the classes. So Ms. Haagen-Joss, if you guys want to kick us off, go right ahead.
Oh, we were wondering if you guys find any styrofoam or bubble wrap in the Arctic.
Styrofoam and bubble wrap in the Arctic, yeah.
That's a great question. I haven't done like the beach surveys in the Arctic. I did more like, I guess, seabird stuff up there. But what we're finding in the North Atlantic where I'm at, so we're under the Arctic, we actually find a lot of styrofoam. There's one beach that I'm thinking about, as you mentioned, and it's covered with styrofoam. And the problem is that it's not in the big chunks that we find when we use packaging. Like when you open a new toy or something like that and there's a massive piece of styrofoam, what we're finding are little popcorn size pieces of styrofoam, and they keep on breaking up, and like you can collect one chunk and it'll turn into half a dozen in a matter of seconds because it's once it's exposed to the sun, plastic breaks up even more. So yeah, the problem is that styrofoam, once it gets on a beach in a big piece, it can break up into thousands of microplastics in a matter of like over time.
Yeah.
So great question.
And it's an interesting quick follow-up just to say that, you know, these places, these remote places like Eastern Greenland that you visited have plastic on them. You know, we've dealt with other researchers, plastic in the middle of the Pacific Ocean and little islands that are just covered in plastic. So this is something where, again, you spoke to the idea that this is everywhere. Ocean currents take plastic all over the world, and it's, yeah.
Well, and plastic's being found in the deepest parts of the ocean. We're talking like, not like buildings and like how tall like city buildings are. Picture dozens of those stacked on top of each other, and we're finding plastics at the very bottom. So it's really like, it's, yeah, it is everywhere in the world for sure.
Yeah. All right, Miss Hawksima's class, if you guys have a second question, come on up.
Have you ever seen one of those big plastic bags in that article? How big was it?
Oh, the big iceberg bag. I haven't actually. That's a great question. I haven't seen a shopping bag that big. Amazon might have something like that, but no. For that article, they actually took a normal sized bag and they blew it up. That's supposed to be a really up close picture, but yeah, I would be really scared if I saw one of those bags, to be honest.
Terrifying. That's an interesting point, actually, not with regards to maybe one giant piece of plastic, but so one thing we didn't touch on is this idea of gyres in the ocean and the huge, like, floating islands of plastic, basically. Speak a little to that.
For sure. So what's being said a lot recently is that there's islands of plastic in the oceans and all that. And what we like to think of it more with our fields is it's almost like patches in the ocean that are kind of like plastic soup, where it's not like a solid piece of plastic that's floating around. It's like if you like take a sample of that water, you'll find plastics in it, because these plastics are so broken down that these little patches of water kind of like, they already go in circles around because of how ocean currents work. So it's like moving bodies of water, and these plastics got trapped in these like things called gyres. And the thing is that these plastic soup areas are basically, there's 5 different ones in the world. So a lot of people talk about the one in the Pacific, that it's a big garbage patch there. But actually, there's one underneath Newfoundland that basically borders with Canada and the US. So, you know, there's like these plastic soup vortexes kind of all around the world. So that's another area of high concentration for plastics.
Okay. Let's head back to Ms. Windelsbacher's class. You guys have a second question? Come on up.
Hi, yeah, sorry. Ariana, you want to go ahead? You can be here. Yeah.
Okay, what would you say is the animal that consumes the most plastic?
Ooh, that's a great question. That is really good. That's like $1 million question that most scientists are thinking about right now. To be honest, we predict there's like 10 million animals on this planet, including the ones that live on land. Anywhere from 10 million to 100 million animals. In the studies that have been done on animals that eat plastic in the ocean, there's only been less than 1,000 of them have been studied. So to be honest with you, I don't know. There's some animals though that are better at eating plastic than others. Animals like albatrosses, there are these seabirds that are beautiful. They're nice and big. They have gorgeous wings. And the thing is that they contain a lot of plastic because the way they feed in the ocean. And animals like whales, because they go after fish and all that and different krill, when they open their mouths and things just kind of come in, they're really good at collecting plastics. But the thing is that we don't really know which one, you know, is kind of the sink for plastic. So that's a really good question.
Yeah. All right, we're going to check in with Miss Mills' class. Maybe the mic's working, maybe it's not. If it's not, you guys can type in a second one. I don't know. Everything looks in theory like it's working. How about, okay, you know what, there's a lot of you guys, so why don't you guys type in 2 questions, and then I'll pass those on the moment you guys are done. In the meantime, Mr. Coates' class again wanted to ask, how much garbage do you find in the ocean that is not plastic, Justine?
Oh, that's a great question. So the survey that I'm working on with my colleagues for the Placentia Ocean Debris Survey, we look for other materials like glass, so like sea glass when you find it on the shoreline, metals, fabrics, things like that. I would say it would probably be less than 10% of those materials. About 10% of 100% tends to be non-plastic. whereas the majority of it, close to 90%, I would say, is plastic. This is like very kind of rough figures right now, but it's been shown actually a lot when people go and do beach cleanups that the majority, like beach cleanups all over the world, it mostly tends to be plastic.
Okay. First question from Miss Mills' class from Muna. Have you come across an injured seabird, like a seabird that might have ingested plastic? And if so, did you do anything when you were in
seabird? I haven't actually seen plastic trapped, or an animal trapped in plastic, or an animal eating plastic. I'm very grateful for that, to be honest, because it would break my heart as a scientist. You know, you're in the fields because you love animals, and the thing is that there's a lot of pictures that are floating around, and there was a documentary done by BBC that trailed a really good science group down in the southern hemisphere, and they looked at seabirds eating plastic, shearwaters. And yeah, they see that probably on a regular basis when they're down there, birds eating plastics, but I haven't seen anything, which, yeah.
Okay. Just a quick follow-up in case the meaning was a little different. Birds injured in Greenland? Did you find any, like, just never mind plastic, injured in any way?
No, actually, no. We never saw plastic within the nests and stuff like that in terms of observations. There was one of the colleagues from the trip actually did work on studying the birds eating plastics and things like that, but they were really tiny pieces. Yeah. So yeah, it wasn't like a big dramatic, yeah, there's objects inside the birds.
Okay. Second question, actually, before we go to the second question from that class, I just want to note the BBC documentary, unless I'm mistaken, is Blue Planet 2. Yes? The last
yeah.
Yeah, so I urge classes to watch that Blue Planet 2 major documentary series. Spent an entire episode on marine plastics and issues in the oceans. It's an incredible episode, one of the best hours you'll spend watching nature documentaries. Yeah. All right, let's go to Abby's question from Miss Mills' group. What do you do with the plastics once you finish testing it? Do you get rid of it? Do you keep it? What happens?
Oh, for sure. Our lab right now is full of garbage. Not the big stuff. So when we go on the beaches and we clean up okay, so let me break this down. We do two different types of things when we're on the beaches. We pick up big pieces of garbage. So, you know, ordinary things like shoes, sometimes wash up, flip-flops, plastic bottles, bags, that kind of stuff. That all goes to a garbage dump. So we collect it all and we bring it and dispose of it properly so that it doesn't enter the ocean again, or at least we hope. And when we go out to the beaches, we also take little shovels and we dig for sand and sediment. So we basically fill up buckets with sand and we sort through that sand in the lab and we try to see if there's plastics in it. And we actually hold on to those because what we want to do is look at, on a closer scale under a microscope, what those plastics actually are. So yeah, we have the smaller pieces of plastic in the lab, but the bigger stuff we like to bring to the garbage dump. So yeah.
Excellent. All right, we'll wrap up with a question from Miss Wafer. If you guys want to turn this off, go right ahead.
Okay, great. So a couple of questions. Kitoko is actually in Adelaide, Australia, and she just wondered about some statistics as far as fish dying from plastic. And then Sky is in Michigan. She's in 4th grade, and she wondered if you heard about the whale in the Philippines that swallowed 80 pounds of plastic and what you thought about that.
Yeah, those are great questions. Thank you so much for that. So starting off with the whale, I saw, yeah, it was a lot of plastic bags in there. And to be honest with you, I'm not really surprised at this point that most marine mammals have plastic inside of them. So we think whales, I mean, because they're big, they can kind of buffer themselves against changes in the environment. And the thing is that with the way they feed, it was found actually in England that I think almost every marine mammal within the radius of the country actually ingests plastic. So that I wasn't really too surprised about, which is really sad. And it kind of even fuels the conversation and how can we make our oceans cleaner so that we don't have to see news headlines like that with whales eating plastic. And sorry, the other question was?
There you go.
Just some statistics from Kitoko, she's in Australia. Just some statistics about how many fish die every year from plastics.
Yeah.
To be honest with you, I haven't come across any statistics of that nature. It's right now, it's really tricky to understand how animals are exactly impacted by plastic, because we hear a lot about, you know, plastic ending up in their stomachs, and then there's a big question mark in what happens. with fish, they tend to mostly, because their stomachs or their GI tracts are so short, they tend to poop out actually a lot of plastic. So you don't really find too many plastics in their stomachs. But in birds, it's the opposite. It tends to kind of act like a sink and it sits there. So with regards to how many die, not too sure, but hit me up in 10 years and I should be able to give you an answer, hopefully.
All right, and before we wrap up, as we've got some classes going to lunch, is there anything that classes can do directly to help curb plastic pollution? Is there anything that jumps out?
Oh, for that, yeah. So you guys have so much power in your hands with making this issue better. And I look to you, not because I want you to take on the work, because I'm out doing work as well on this issue, but plastic surrounds us every day. And there's a lot of simple options we can take to reduce the amount of plastic we use. By saying no to things like single-use plastic, where you only use it once and you throw it out, that makes a good impact. And especially since you're in a school, if you guys start petitions for your schools not to have these single-use plastics, or to try to get it together with other classrooms and write a letter to like local politicians. I've heard of classrooms actually taking a stance on plastic pollution, saying no, we don't want any more. And getting out there in your local communities, there's a lot of impact you can have. And honestly, I can only do so much on this issue, and it's really up to you guys in your communities. You don't have to be near an ocean or up in the Arctic to actually work on this. You can do this right in your own backyards.
Outstanding. Well, Justine, thank you so much for that. What we do at the end of every hangout, and boys and girls, if you guys could get ready, I'm going to demute every class's microphones. And if you guys could join me and say a huge thank you to Justine for joining us. Go right ahead. Got the lunch group going in. We appreciate it. Classes, we hope to have you back. We do marine plastic hangouts a lot. We have a lot of for every single one that we do, so we appreciate you guys doing it. Justine, thank you so much for joining us for the first time. We look forward to having you back as soon as you can. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Jesse.